Aujourd'hui, nous accueillons donc Richard Weston pour son film The Burying Party. Richard Weston, 29 ans, est directeur et producteur cinématographique et il a réalisé The Burying Party en 2018 avec l'idée de faire passer l'émotion en créant de la poésie visuelle.
Richard Weston, so 29 years of age, film director and producer, realized The Burying Party in 2018, creating visual poetry, hence trying to convey emotion.
Son inspiration, les mots de Siegfried Sassoon, le mentor de Wilfred Owen. Have you forgotten yet? As-tu encore oublié? Dans Aftermath, l'après-guerre. Mais aussi ceux d'Owen dans Strange Meeting. I am the enemy you killed, my friend. Je suis l'ennemi que tu as tué, cher ami. Le film a obtenu 16 prix, notamment celui du meilleur acteur au New York Film Awards et celui de la meilleure narration à Los Angeles.
So you were inspired by Sassoon words, Wilfred Owen's mentor, Have You Forgotten Yet in Aftermath, but also in Owen's poetry itself, in Strange Meeting, I'm the enemy, you killed my friend. You wanted to pass on emotion in creating visual poetry, and as we said, you received 16 awards, that is to say the best actor in New York and the best narrative in Los Angeles.
L'entretien et la traduction sont assurés par Jeanne-Marie Dineur, que nous remercions très chaleureusement, qui est agrégée d'anglais, membre de l'association Wilfred Owen et du groupe de recherche universitaire NZSA sur le Pacifique. Elle vient de traduire Anachronie, une série de 80 poèmes par l'artiste Gerardo Rodriguez Salas, dont les thèmes se rapportent au voyage, à la nostalgie, à la réécriture, à la réinterprétation et à son ancrage culturel qui va de Grenade à la Nouvelle Zélande. Et elle met également en place des projets pédagogiques reliant la France et l'Angleterre autour de la poésie d'Owen et de ses comparses Tennyson, Keats et Stevenson, et associant des artistes qui accompagnent la mise en voix et ou en musique de l'interprétation des élèves.
So the interview and exchange will be held by myself. I will be the host as a member of the Wilfred Owen Association France, but also as a member of the NZSA studies. I've just been translating Anachronia, a series of 80 poems by Gerardo Rodriguez Salas, which exploited themes of traveling, rewriting, reinterpretation, deeply rooted in culture from Grenada to New Zealand. I've also set forward a pedagogical projects around Wilfred Owen and poetry and his fellow poets, associating artists like Sally Crabtree, who helps students with music and also voicing the poems of Wilfred Owen.
Je vous remercie. Je vais couper ma caméra et mon micro et je vais laisser la parole à Jeanne-Marie Dineur et Richard Weston. Merci beaucoup.
Right. Richard, may I welcome you on this program? I would like to move on to your work. Thank you for being with us this afternoon.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Your choices. Maintenant, avançons sur votre œuvre, Richard. Je vous remercie d'être parmi nous cet après-midi pour discuter vos choix. Your film is the third of the kind of Wilfred Owen. The first was War Requiem in 1989 with Benjamin Britten's music and Owen's poems read but with no dialogue. The second was Regeneration in 1997, based on Pat Barker's trilogy with Jill McKinnon as film director, and that received the award of Best Actor in London. The main character was Siegfried Sassoon and his thoughts on Wilfred Owen. Votre film est le troisième du genre sur Wilfred Owen. Le premier était War Requiem, œuvre musicale qui reprenait la musique de Benjamin Britten et la lecture des poèmes d'Owen, mais sans dialogue. Le second était Regeneration en 97, basé sur la trilogie de Pat Barker et qui a reçu le prix du meilleur acteur de Londres. Le personnage principal était Siegfried Sassoon et ses pensées sur Owen. Richard, it was a beautiful film with outstanding pictures. Here are some of my, reflection, and I will start the first questions, and then we will move on to other people.
Sure.
You have chosen as title to your film The Burying Party. which are the words Owen used in the poem Exposure. Both terms are tricky to translate into French, but also for the English, it has a cultural reference to Shakespeare's grave diggers in Hamlet, especially that of questioning man and mortality. The bearing party in English refers to a group, a given and type-bound entity, which is rather pictured in action. Its translation into French would be fossoyeur, but it considers individuals next to one another working at digging, and the reader does not imagine corpses. He or she would picture a professional with a spade in a cemetery. Exposure is also very difficult to translate as it's rather ambiguous in meaning. Exposure could mean exposure to bad weather conditions, or it could mean revelation, or confronted to reality, or as in photography, almost a mirror effect portraying your own death. Can you explain your choice for the title? I'll translate first. Vous avez choisi comme titre de votre film Les Fossoyeurs, qui sont des mots que Owen utilise dans son poème Exposure. Ces deux termes sont délicats à traduire en français, car pour les Anglais, la référence remonte à Shakespeare et les Fossoyeurs dans Hamlet, et cela questionne l'homme et sa mortalité. Le terme anglais fait référence à un groupe, une entité nommée et très unie, qui est vue en action. Sa traduction en français ne donne pas une complète image, car on voit des individus, l'un près de l'autre, qui s'affairent à creuser. Le lecteur n'a pas forcément d'image de corps rédit. Il ou elle voit un professionnel avec une pelle dans un cimetière. Exposure est aussi difficile à traduire, car le terme est plutôt ambigu dans sa signification. Exposé au mauvais temps, révélation, confrontation à la réalité, ou encore à l'exposition d'une lentille photographique qui donnerait un effet de miroir, qui montrerait votre propre mort. Pouvez-vous expliquer votre choix de titre?
Thank you. It was lovely to hear all of the things you were saying about Shakespeare and all the literal references. That was really really good. And I think there's obviously that connection with the poem that's really important, but also I felt like there's a bit of a double entendre with it, a double meaning, in the sense that the burying party was also the party of friends that he made, his contemporaries. So Siegfried Sassoon, Robert Graves, Charles Scott Moncrief were all talking about war and the sort of catastrophe of war. But I think Wilfred Owen was singular and unique in the sense that his art was about death, but he became the person who died for his art. And I feel like all the people who taught him all these different things, his mentor Siegfried Sassoon, Robert Graves, always looking to write the best poem they could, were helping to bury him into the eternal soil, which is poetry, literature, and art, which, whether that's English poetry or universal poetry, I think Owen's work touches various people all over the world.
Bien, donc c'est évident que il y ait une référence littéraire, et je vous remercie de rappeler la référence à Shakespeare. Mais je dirais que c'est aussi une double entente. La référence à ces comparses poètes font que c'est bien entendu un art unique, l'art qui parle de la mort, mais également ils ont contribué à ce que Owen soit enterré dans un sol éternel, c'est-à-dire que sa poésie et sa littérature deviennent universelles. Right, thank you very much for that. Okay, I'll ask you another question and then we'll move on to the others. What were your artistic and historic inspirations for this film? Alors, quelles étaient vos inspirations artistiques et historiques?
Thank you. Well, the first and foremost, I went to the Somme and the battlefields without a view of making a film about Wilfred Owen. But when I was there with our two producers, we wanted to make a film, but we didn't know what film. I went to the Forester's house and first heard Wilfred Owen's final letter to his mother, and it struck a chord in me that a poet that was so visual with his language in his poetry and so surreal in a lot of ways could write such a beautiful letter, a very human letter to his mother to say everything's okay at the same time. And it was interesting to me to think of a writer, but also a soldier who did his duty in the army, but also did his duty for his friends and his family, and how that conflict, that could have conflicted with one another. And that was interesting to me. But also from an artistic point of view, there were a lot of paintings that I was looking at the time, which really affected the images that I was trying to create, the cinematography. So there were artists such as Rosa Bonheur, who drew cattle and livestock, but usually on beautiful hills. And one of the things that was very sad to me is knowing the context of how she painted those pictures, that there are always animals are about to go to slaughter. There are always animals that are about to be killed. And I thought that her depiction of animals on beautiful hillsides, I could probably try and do the same with people, with humans who were doing the same thing. They're on hillsides enjoying their lives together, but then ultimately going to their death.
Ok. Alors d'abord, je suis allée dans la Somme. Je ne savais pas exactement ce que j'avais l'intention de produire comme film. Puis ensuite, je me suis rendue à Ors, à la maison forestière. Et là, j'ai lu la dernière lettre de Owen à sa mère. Et à partir de ce moment-là, je me suis dit, Owen a fait son devoir. Il a fait son devoir pas, comme soldat, mais aussi il a fait son devoir comme correspondant à sa famille et à sa mère. En même temps, me sont arrivées des images, notamment de la peintre Rosa Bonheur, qui a peint le bétail dans les champs, et également je pensais à ces animaux qu'on amenait à l'abattoir, et je me suis dit il faut que je transpose ça avec des gens, des soldats sur des collines, et c'est un peu la métaphore que j'ai utilisée. Am I right in saying that that's the metaphor you wanted to use?
Yes, yeah. Thank you.
So, maintenant, nous pouvons passer aux autres questions. Si vous avez des questions, je me ferai une joie de traduire. I have the pleasure to translate whatever language. So, who would like to ask a question? De Sally Crabtree. So Sally Crabtree says, I liked what you said about Wilfred Owen being buried in the eternal whatever. So she in the eternal soil, I think you used the expression.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
Yes.
Would you like me to respond?
Perhaps you can say something to Sally about that.
Sure. Hi, Sally. Thanks for your question. I think that it does. the eternal soil in that respect. I think it does nourish further poetic souls, because I think the legacy that's left behind by artists such as Shakespeare or Blake or Owen, they're sort of tapping into something universal, and that soil keeps getting turned over and over again. And I thought that the sheer brilliance of Owen's visual style and all of the things that he was discussing was unlike any other British writer of his time. I think a lot, and not to denigrate any other war poets, because I love most of them, but I think Owen's work was something that was tapping into something that was a little bit more universal rather than, say, for example, patriotic. It was about the brutality of war and everything else. But yeah, I mean, from my perspective, it was a perfect subject and project to tackle, trying to find my own artistic voice. I feel like I was finding it a lot through Wilfred Owen's poetry, and I think that a lot of these artists are vessels for finding your own voice in the world.
Okay, thank you. Alors, Sally Crabtree, qui est une artiste performeur, a posé la question pourquoi ce sol éternel? Alors, Richard dit que l'héritage de Shakespeare, de Blake et de Owen, bien sûr, sont des propos que l'on remue sans arrêt et qu'on réinterprète sans arrêt. Et sans dénigrer les autres auteurs, il a pensé que Owen touchait un public plus universel, car il ne parlait pas du patriotisme, mais plutôt de la brutalité de la guerre. Et il voit ça plutôt comme un vaisseau, c'est-à-dire comme il prend appui sur un point de départ de l'artiste qui va communiquer avec le lecteur ou l'auditeur. So I said, you communicate, the vessel is from the artist to the reader or to the viewer or whatever.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, thanks.
How do we come in here, Jeanne-Marie? Because I'd like to make a point to Richard.
Okay, go on. We can hear you.
Okay, right. Well, Richard, first, I'd actually do one comment. I love the shot, sort of second shot, I think, in the film, as you see Owen walking away from the conversation with his mother, and he walks, as it were, into the ground. I thought there was a lovely idea as he literally disappears into the ground. I was sorry, in a way, we didn't see it again towards the end, where you have that, another version of that conversation. But my question is this: we've heard a lot about Sassoon today, but in your film, there's a lot more emphasis, or almost an equal emphasis, on Scott Moncrief. And I felt that there was, I wondered how much you'd relied on Dominic Hibbard's biography of Owen, who does rather stress, the homosexual context of Half Moon Street, etc. We know that Sassoon very much disliked Scott Moncrief and the influence he thought had on Owen. I just wonder how you decided upon that emphasis, giving Scott Moncrief more prominence.
Sure.
Okay, I'll translate this first. Alors, Damien Grant pose la question de... d'abord, il fait une appréciation sur la deuxième séquence filmique où on voit Owen qui se sépare de sa mère et qui va marcher dans la nature. Il parle de la relation de Sassoon et de Moncrief dans le film et fait référence à Dominic Hibbard, qui est un historien qui a écrit une grande biographie de Owen, et il dit que Sassoon détestait Moncrief et il demande à Richard pourquoi il a choisi cet angle.
Thank you. And Yeah, thank you very much, Damien, for that question. Yeah, for your first point with regard to the shot where there's that wide shot, I think we actually filmed it on the Wirral, overlooking North Wales, but it was supposed to sort of have that sense of the water between England and France. Obviously, it doesn't look like that in real life, but it was just, you know, creating that sort of illusion that he's going to another place. Yeah, with regard to burying into the ground, I take your point. I really loved that first shot, but the way that we sort of change it at the end is, rather than him going into the ground there, we see him dying at the canal. So it goes from his visualization of going into the ground into, as we spoke before, perhaps the eternal soil, to actually be a part of it at the end. The reality of his death and his burial is realized at the end, after all of his poetry and after all of his experience. It's the sort of before and after element. And then on your second point with regard to Moncrief, it's a very good point, because of course, yeah, it was the Dominic Hibberd biography that was helpful in looking at the Moncrief stuff. Clearly, a lot of it isn't necessarily factual. It's a lot of stuff that we can assume based on the stuff that Hibberd says, the fact that Owen stayed with Moncrief in Scarborough and Sassoon didn't like Moncrief and so on. We took a couple of liberties. Sassoon wasn't at Robert Graves' wedding, but in order to enhance the story, it was helpful for him to see Moncrief and Owen have that connection. I think the reason why it was important to put that emphasis on Moncrief is because Sassoon didn't want Owen to go back to war. And I think Owen was looking at various injuries that different poets had. Robert Graves had shrapnel in his chest, survived. Sassoon managed to kill 60 Germans with a few grenades, leapt into a trench. Moncrief's leg was almost blown half to hell. And Owen meeting all these different artists sort of set him on the way that he wanted to be part of a war that he didn't actually have a very good record in at that time. But that's just another point. Sorry, Jeanne-Marie, there's quite a lot here. The passage from Owen's letter to Sassoon, he calls Sassoon Christ, Colonel, Keats, a confessor in profile. And I feel like Sassoon and Owen meant everything to each other, and potentially, like they could have potentially been best friends. They could have potentially been lovers. They could have potentially been, you know, almost, you know, a sort of fraternal element, but they was never realized. And yeah, I thought the Moncrief element was almost allowed Sassoon to have that jealousy that Owen could spend his final days with someone that wasn't him.
Okay.
Okay. Good. Thank
Bien,
you.
donc le passage de la première séquence en fait se passe au Pays de Galles, et c'est en fait une illusion que l'on voit de la terre vers la mer, et la dernière séquence filmique parle de la réalité de Owen lorsqu'il est tombé sur le sol. Donc, je voulais garder cette image de la réalité. L'utilisation de Moncrief dans l'œuvre est bien sûr basée sur l'œuvre de Dominic Hibberd et a été utile dans le sens où c'est un amour qui est suggéré, mais qui forcément va comporter quelques inexactitudes. Par exemple, Sassoon n'était pas au mariage, mais les trois poètes qui entourent Owen ont tous été blessés physiquement à la guerre. Nous avons Sassoon, Robert Graves et Moncrief. Et concernant Sassoon, Sassoon ne souhaitait pas que Owen retourne à la guerre. Donc, le lien le lien masculin, on va dire, qui va relier Sassoon à Owen est peut-être celui de la meilleure camaraderie, comme un amour plus intense, mais lorsque Owen s'adresse à Sassoon et inversement, eh bien, il y a une grande admiration des deux côtés, et Sassoon utilise des mots comme le Christ dans un de ses poèmes, etc. Voilà.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Une autre question?
If I may. Can I ask a question?
Yes, do so.
Okay. I do it in English. That's directly, if it's possible, Jeanne-Marie.
Yes, do, and then you can translate for yourself if you
And
like.
then I can translate mine for myself.
Well, whatever. Do you want me to translate?
No, that's okay. No problem. Thank you very much. I was very taken with the rhythm of the film, the soundtrack and the music, and I thought there was a multi-sensorial, dreamlike quality about it. And particularly also with the piece at the end with the woman singing. So I was wondering if this is how you, as a filmmaker, but also as a poetry lover, is this how you conceive of what you call visual poetry? Donc, ma question portait sur l'idée du rythme et de la bande son, qui me semble être tout à fait fascinant parce qu'il y a un aspect onirique et multisensoriel très, très fort dans cette expérience cinématographique. Et le dernier morceau, à la fin en particulier, que je trouve très, très émouvant. Et je voulais savoir si ça faisait partie de cette vision de ce qu'est une poésie visuelle au cinéma.
Oh, thank you very much for your question and your kind words about the film. I think that there are various crossovers between different artistic disciplines. You know, I think that music can inform writing, and writing can inform music, and they can inform cinema as well. And I felt like just speaking about the music first and foremost, Matthew Davide, who did the soundtrack, I think it's a wonderful suite. It was the summer before we actually filmed it, so it's probably a year before we filmed the actual piece. He showed me this piece of music, which was incredibly emphatic, and it ends up to being the final piece in the film. And when I first listened to it, I visualized the whole sequence from when he says goodbye to his mother to when he's dying at the canal, and it all just managed to come together. That piece and its rhythm and its tempo set this sort of tone for the whole film. And in that regard, I think it's quite beautiful the fact that these different things can cross over and influence each other. I think a lot of what it comes down to for me is that yes, the multi-sensorial element is incredibly inspiring to me, whether it's paintings, poetry, or music. They can give me the answer to something that I wouldn't have known before.
Thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you.
Richard m'a répondu en disant que effectivement pour lui toutes ces disciplines artistiques, tous ces champs artistiques se nourrissent les uns les autres, et que cette dimension multisensorielle est très importante, que la bande son en fait a été une révélation pour lui, puisque au moment où il l'a entendu, à peu près 1 an avant de réaliser le film, a été une espèce de vision mentale où le rythme, l'atmosphère et la musique ont créé une synergie convergente.
Thank you very much. Next question. Une autre question?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. Hello.
Hi, Richard. First of all, Richard, thank you very much for such a subtle approach to Owen's life and poetry. I think it was very subtle, very enjoyable, different perspective if we think about it. The film finishes with a quotation from Owen's unfinished preface, which I will try to reproduce here, is all the poet can do today is to warn. This is why the true poets must be truthful. As you perfectly reflect in your film, Owen tried to convey the brutality of war beyond patriotic mysticism. And as you said, he died for his art. And yet, I feel there is an aesthetic approach to war and its brutality in his poetry. He maybe thought of himself as a visionary figure, as a kind of sacrificial figure who was meant to die for the sake of the truth about war. And obviously, he did that through his poetry. My question is, how did you approach this kind of messianic dimension in the film, this kind of Bard-like feeling? I feel you did a very interesting thing with the reference to the letter to Sassoon, comparing him with different figures, but one of them, Jesus Christ. I don't know, I'm curious to know how, you managed to convey this love for poetry to the verge of feeling almost like a bard, this kind of mystical poet or something. I don't know if I made myself clear. It was a bit messy, but I'm very curious to know.
First.
Sorry, Jeanne-Marie, I think I put it difficult for you.
No, it's okay. Alors,
Thank you.
Donc, Gerardo pose la question de l'approche subtile en disant qu'il termine son film en posant la question, est-ce que les vrais poètes doivent dire la vérité pour en finir? Il voit aussi dans ce film une approche esthétique au sacrifice en disant, est-ce que vous pensez que vous avez une approche messianique de la guerre? Voilà. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thanks. That was a wonderful question. Thank you very much. It's, yeah, I mean, I've not been asked that before about the sacrificial element and the messianic quality. Well, first and foremost, with the quote, all the poet can do today is warn, the true poets being truthful. I think that in order for Owen to sort of represent what was happening in war, he had to sort of show the world a mirror, a universal mirror. And one thing he could do, well, at least for the West, one thing he did was to do it through religion, I think. And that sacrificial element that you were saying, when he says the pity of war, I think of the Pieta, Mary holding Jesus in her arms. And I think that that's sort of what a lot of mothers went through in World War I, that they their children never came home. They were very young men who never had a future because they were dragged into this war through propaganda and everything else. But with regard to how to communicate that, there's quite a few scenes in the film which have sort of a religious element. There's one where early on in the film, Owen is about to go and see a German soldier, and the back of the shot is the facade of a blown up church, which is supposed to be representative of in Joncourt when they were there. Next, there's a flashback to when he's in the church looking at a letter from his mother saying happy birthday, and he looks up and he sees the words on the stained glass window saying that Jesus kept all of his mother's words in his heart. So him thinking about that, and it then cutting to going back to war. The shot of the crucifix corner of the man in the tree, that actually happened. Like, soldiers were blown up into the trees and were unfortunately in almost like a crucifixional position, if that's a word. And I based the composition of that shot on Raphael's crucifixion to infer that sort of Renaissance element of Owen's knowledge of art, and trying to invoke something in his mind that's translated to us, that he can see everything that we hold dear in forgiveness, in love, in the general idea of Christianity, is sort of being torn apart by this war. The love, forgiveness, and everything is being torn apart for sacrifices that aren't needed, which is, not the same way as Jesus Christ, because Christ actually, died for people's sins, whereas people here are dying because they've been tricked into something. Sorry, Jeanne-Marie, that's quite a lot to say.
Bien. Donc, la réponse est concernant cet élément sacrificiel. Eh bien, c'est la première fois que Richard a cette question. Et il dit que, bien entendu, Owen représente ce miroir universel de la religion également, puisqu'il parle de la pitié de la guerre. Et pour lui, ça évoque la Pietà de Michel-Ange, et également ces mères qui ne voient jamais revenir leurs enfants. Il dit également que dans son film, on retrouve 3 éléments religieux, notamment on retrouve la façade de l'église bombardée, donc pour lui c'est l'image de Joncourt. On voit également un vitrail alors qu'il vient d'écrire un joyeux anniversaire à sa mère, et dans ce vitrail on voit Jésus. Et puis le troisième élément, c'est lorsqu'on retrouve les soldats dans les arbres, ils apparaissent un peu comme des crucifix, comme l'image de Raphaël. Donc l'évocation à l'art pour lui est essentielle, car à la Renaissance, il voit l'art comme étant rappelant le pardon et l'amour, et qui est en fait détérioré par cette guerre qu'ils n'ont pas envie de mener. I did my best.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oui, moi je vais poser ma question en français pour les quelques francophones qu'il y a dans la salle, si j'ose dire. Tout d'abord, ne vous méprenez pas, hein, j'ai vraiment beaucoup apprécié ce film, mais fatalement, grâce à Harold Owen et ses grands ciseaux, je crois qu'on aura tous toujours un petit peu notre propre Wilfred. Hein, il subsiste tellement de blanc dans sa biographie. Donc, disons qu'il y a une seule chose qui m'a surpris et m'a choqué, et je pense que c'est peut-être beaucoup plus qu'anecdotique. C'est le moment où on voit Owen qui abat un prisonnier allemand, quasiment à bout portant. Et je me suis dit, tiens, ça c'est vraiment curieux. Ça me fait penser à la lettre qu'il a écrite en octobre pour dire qu'il avait, si je me souviens bien, c'est I shot only one man with my revolver at 30 yards, ou un truc comme ça. Bon, ce qui est quand même très, très différent. Alors je me suis dit, bon là, il y a sûrement une fonction symbolique, peut-être une espèce de raccourci, de montrer qu'Owen participe à la violence de la guerre et que ce n'est certes pas un saint, mais disons que ça m'a étonné. Évidemment, ça étonne plus quand, bon, comme moi, on a quand même passé une bonne partie de sa vie à lire le brave Wilfred, mais je voudrais recueillir le sentiment de Richard Weston sur ce tout petit aspect de son moyen-métrage.
Right, so Xavier Not, who is the translator of Owen in France and in Belgium, anyway, in French-speaking countries, says we have our own Owen, and that he was surprised and shocked by the fact that we see in your film Owen shooting a German at a very, very short distance. And he says that in spite of the fact that in one of his letters he wrote, I shot only one man, he wanted to know why you did that, and were you thinking of a symbol, and what would be the function of the symbol for you?
And he
Thank you.
says no prisoners, if I remember.
Okay, very good.
Thank you. Actually, Owen killed quite a lot of people in his final stretch of war. He killed 60 people at least in Joncourt. He took their machine gun and killed them with it as well. He spoke in his letters about, he says, I fought like an angel to his mother. He speaks quite a lot about how much he killed and became a much better soldier. In terms of the narrative of the film, you know, in his letters to Sassoon and all the other artists he was speaking to, his record before he went back in 1917 was awful in terms of how many he killed compared to those people, and he had something to prove. I feel like whether or not he did actually kill the soldier from close range, he had something to prove, and he was part of this sort of incensed element that he had to become synonymous with war itself in order to be a better poet, and that was an interesting idea for me. But by the same token, I never wanted Owen to look like this kind of merciless, horrible person. I think anyone who goes to war is very complex. I think morality is very complex and ambiguous, and for me, there's this sort of, with a lot of war films I've seen, people are either, usually in these circumstances, kind of represented as either entirely good or entirely bad, and I think that's what I was trying to avoid. I guess that there's an ambiguity in the morality, if that makes any sense.
Alors, Owen a en fait tué plus de 60 personnes. Il dit même j'ai combattu comme un ange. Il voulait probablement prouver qu'il devenait lui-même synonyme de la guerre. Richard dit que de toute façon, aller à la guerre est complexe et que la moralité est complexe. Pourquoi? Parce que la différence entre le bien et le mal est quelque chose qui est représenté forcément dans des films de guerre, mais qui est deux notions complexes. Voilà.
Thank you.
D'autres questions? Peter Lindroth, perhaps, on music? Peter Lindroth is a musician, a composer, a Swedish composer who composed something on Wilfred Owen. He composed an opera. So perhaps, hello, Peter.
Hello there. Well, it wasn't exactly an opera. It was a cycle of songs. Yeah. We had it performed as 100 years thing in a church of ours. No, well, I haven't got anything to ask really about the music. I think it was beautiful, and I was impressed by this sort of impressionist, poetic thing with the whole film. I liked it a lot. I haven't got any questions really.
Not even on the music?
No.
Okay, right.
I think it was very good. It enhanced the movie. It was great.
Oh, I really appreciate that. I'll tell Matthew. Thank you very much.
Please do.
Yeah. Cheers, Peter.
Donc, Peter Lindroth est un compositeur. Il a fait un cycle de musique sur Wilfred Owen qui est de type opéra. dirons-nous. Et sa réflexion était que c'était un film magnifique, presque impressionniste dans la création. Merci, Peter.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
Quelqu'un d'autre? Somebody else would like to ask a question? We still have 10 minutes to go, but I can ask some other questions myself if nobody else has anything to say.
Okay.
Oh, Benoit.
Benoit, I should like to ask my question in French.
Okay,
It's a joke. It's a joke. So I will speak French. C'est une question plus générale. C'est pas vous faire offense que dire vous êtes plutôt jeune au regard du quinquagénaire que je suis. Et ma question, et qui je crois est intéressante pour nous continentaux, que nous soyons belges, français, italiens ou autres, est de comprendre comment Wilfred Owen est perçu aujourd'hui en Angleterre. Alors j'ai suivi votre propos, vous avez déjà apporté des éléments de réponse, hein, donc le plaçant dans une lignée de grands poètes et de grands écrivains, mais quelle est la perception des jeunes ou des quadrades aujourd'hui en Angleterre de Wilfred Owen, donc 100 ans après sa mort, alors que maintenant toutes les commémorations sont derrière nous.
Okay, so I'll translate that. It's rather a general question by Benoit Misson, who is the president of the Wilfred Owen Association France. And he says, you are rather young, and as continentals, how we would like to know how Wilfred Owen is perceived in Great Britain after 100 years of his death.
Thank you. Well, I actually made the film older than when Wilfred Owen had died. So when I made the film, I was actually a year older than when Wilfred Owen actually passed away. So it is possible, I think, to be able to create these things when you're young. I think how people see Owen here, well, it's varied. I've spoken to quite a few people from various different artistic backgrounds or persuasions. Some people, so for example, there's an anarchic musician / poet who used to play for Crass. His name's Penny Rambeau, and he sees Owen as a sort of revolutionary and a kind of as an anti-war poet, but also sort of, you know, this kind of chaotic force. I think other people see Owen as a binding force in terms of peace and reconciliation, but in terms of from an artistic perspective, unfortunately, it's sort of most people I speak to here before, well, you know, during and after I made the burying party, when I mention the name Wilfred Owen, they say, "Oh, I studied him in school." And I want to try and remove. For me, I kind of want to remove this stigma of people having this element of, "Oh, I learned him in school, so it must be boring," you know. So some people do have that element as well. So I would say it's varied, basically.
Bien. Donc, quand j'ai réalisé ce film, j'avais 1 an de plus que Owen à sa mort. Donc, j'estime que j'avais toute ma place pour faire ce film. Owen est perçu de manière très variée en Angleterre. Il peut être perçu comme quelqu'un qui est anti-guerre, notamment j'ai un ami, Paddy Rumbo, qui est plutôt anarchiste et qui voit Wilfred Owen de cette manière-là, ou il peut être aussi considéré comme unificateur. Il communie en fait avec tout le monde, avec l'universalité. Je voulais sortir Owen du contexte scolaire, car pour beaucoup de gens, ça reste des stigmates de l'école. Et donc, je souhaitais donner une autre image de Wilfred Owen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
5 minutes left for whoever wants to ask a question.
Oui, je voudrais bien poser une question.
Fabienne.
Oui,
So Fabienne
is
somebody who did a project with students. So she worked twice on projects trying to voice Wilfred Owen with high school students from the age of 12 to the age of 16.
Fantastique.
Fabienne, go along.
Oui, alors je voulais dire que j'ai vraiment apprécié le film en tant que professeur également, bien sûr. Et je voulais aussi dire justement que Richard avait bien réussi à faire passer le côté moderne de Wilfred Owen. Et je voulais savoir justement si, quand le film a été écrit, si il savait déjà qui allait incarner Wilfred Owen.
So Fabienne said she loved the film. She mostly liked the modern aspect of the film. And she wanted to know if you knew who was going to be the actor or the actors in the film.
Oh, thank you very much. It's a lovely question. Well, it's a very good question. So with regard to Wilfred Owen, who's played by Matthew State, originally I did an open call, an open casting, and I actually knew Matthew from drama school. We actually met at drama school, and I knew he looked a bit like Wilfred Owen, but I was trying to avoid casting him at any cost. I didn't want to cast him because just because we were friends and I didn't think we could ever work in a sort of professional capacity in a way that I needed in order for this to sort of work. But he sent in his self-tape, and it was amazing. And he sort of captured quite a lot of what I wanted to translate into the film. And yeah, so in that regard, he was the last person I cast, was Wilfred Owen. For Siegfried Sassoon, I had no idea who to cast because I sort of needed someone who seemed to be wise beyond their years, but at the same time be Owen at Sassoon's age, because I think Wilfred Owen speaks about Sassoon having an older mind. And a friend of mine just sent me his email address and his photograph, and immediately I was like, wow, this guy looks a bit like Siegfried Sassoon. So we went and had a chat. We had a talk, like a 2-hour talk in London, in Shoreditch, and he didn't need to audition. He just had the sort of mannerisms, the sort of authority, but also the sort of eloquence that was needed. And he'd done loads of films before. As for Joyce Branner, who played Wilfred Owen's mother, I knew pretty early on I wanted Joyce because she directed me in Manchester once in a play when I was acting, and I thought that she would suit the part very well.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.
Alors, pour Matthew State, en fait, Richard est allé dans une école dramatique avec lui et donc le connaissait bien puisqu'ils étaient amis. Et lors du casting, il ne pensait pas le prendre étant donné qu'ils étaient liés par l'amitié. Et c'est la dernière personne qui est passée dans le casting et il l'a trouvé extraordinaire. Concernant Siegfried Sassoon, il dit qu'il avait besoin d'un acteur qui avait l'air sage, qui était un peu vieux jeu dans ses façons d'être. Et après lui avoir parlé à Shortridge, eh bien, il a dit c'est exactement le portrait que je veux faire de Sassoon. Il avait cette élégance, il avait cette éloquence, etc. Concernant la mère de Wilfred Owen, c'était Joyce Branner, eh bien, il a trouvé que elle l'avait dirigée lors d'une pièce à Manchester et pour lui, eh bien, c'était le bon personnage avec le bon acteur, enfin la bonne actrice ici. Voilà.
Thank you.
Voilà, donc encore une question, one more question because time's up.
Sure.
Alors, j'ai une remarque et une question. J'ai regardé le film hier soir avec mon fils de 11 ans. Je pense que ça lui a vraiment beaucoup plu, et autant qu'à moi, parce qu'il était très concentré pendant le film. Et comme tous les garçons de cet âge, il fantasme un peu la guerre, la violence, il fait des jeux vidéo avec des choses parfois assez violentes. Et là, j'ai trouvé que l'approche de la violence et de la guerre était très intéressante parce que ça n'était pas véritablement choquant dans les images, c'est très sobre et en même temps, c'est à hauteur d'humain. On a vraiment conscience à quel point chaque mort en fait est un être humain avec une histoire. Et après le film, on a donc échangé un peu tous les deux et j'ai eu le sentiment que ça lui a fait beaucoup plus prendre conscience réellement de ce que c'était que la guerre et la violence et comment ça touchait les gens. Donc ça, c'est ma remarque. Et ma question, c'est à la fois le choix du moyen métrage, qui est un format peut-être particulier, peut-être compliqué à diffuser. Donc pourquoi ce choix? Est-ce qu'il y a une raison particulière? Et quelle a été la diffusion du film en France? Est-ce qu'il a été diffusé au cinéma, à la télévision, sous quelle forme? Et comment faire pour qu'il soit encore plus vu et diffusé, puisque c'est vraiment une très belle œuvre. Merci.
Right, so Aurélie watched the film last night with her 11-year-old son, who obviously watches, quite a lot of films on war, like a lot of boys that age, and especially in video games, etc. She thought that your approach to war was rather sober, was rather human, was even humane, because each dead person was somebody identified, and also gave an approach to the child of what war was really like. So she appreciated that. She wanted to know, because it's a sort of a short film, and was it shown in France at any time? Well, actually, I saw it in France. I can say yes, because I saw it in December 2018 in Lille, which has a cinema where you can see films, in the original version. So it was shown in France, but do you know if it was shown a lot or whatever? Donc, concernant la diffusion.
Great, shall I answer?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Well, thanks very much for that with regard to the approach to war. It's a subject I haven't really wanted to approach since or before in terms of a historical aspect, and that's not because I don't. I have quite an emotional connection with the final part of the film with the subject itself, and I just, yeah, I don't know, it was quite, I think it's quite personal for a lot of people just because it's such a waste of life and such an awful thing, but trying to humanize those people is quite it's quite a journey, and I feel like that I wouldn't want to try it again just because that's my kind of say on war done. But yeah, with regard to how much it's been shown, I didn't know it'd been shown in Lille. That's fantastic. I'm really happy about that. With regard to it being shown, we showed it a few times when it was the 100th anniversary of Wilfred Owen's death in England and Wales. But in terms of cinema screenings, we haven't had a huge amount, just because the budget was so small for post-production and distribution. It was difficult to get too many cinema screenings. Also with the length of it, as you say. But yeah, thankfully it's on Amazon Prime for people to sort of view and enjoy, and that's nice. That would be it. Yeah.
Alors, merci beaucoup. Effectivement, je ne voulais pas avoir une approche de la guerre trop violente pour une question personnelle. Je voulais humaniser l'approche comme étant plutôt un voyage. Et pour le 100e anniversaire, eh bien, ça n'a pas été beaucoup distribué pour une question budgétaire, et également, comme vous avez dit, ça fait partie des courts-métrages, donc ça n'intéressait pas peut-être beaucoup les cinémas non plus. Voilà. Alors, avons-nous fait le tour de la question? Have we gone through all the questions? Or?
I think there's one in the comments, Jeanne-Marie. I think there might
okay.
be. Have a quick.
No, those are two people that spoke, sort of, you know, spoke up. So.
Oh, Bridget. Okay. Oh, I see. Okay.
Well, I have a question. You focus a lot on shadow and light in your film, and I had the impression that it was almost like a pre-Raphaelite painting that you were trying to communicate to your viewers. Now, am I right? Am I wrong? And do you have something to say about that? Vous insistez beaucoup sur l'ombre et la lumière, presque comme dans une peinture pré-raphaélite. Est-ce que c'était voulu ou pas?
Yes, I mean that certainly had an impact. Yeah, I mean, you know, there's stuff like I guess that kind of chiaroscuro element is quite important, I think, in the kind of the cinematic quality of the film. And also, apart from pre-Raphaelites, you know, clearly, you know, stuff like The Lady of Shalott and everything else. There's a painting that's always sort of had a large impact on me by Henry Fuseli, which is The Nightmare, with the which is all very, you know, dark and light, and I sort of wanted the war scenes to feel like a nightmare, like a waking nightmare, and the flashbacks to have a little bit more of a gleam, you know, the things are less sort of the light's softer in the flashbacks and a little bit less less harsh. Yeah.
Alors moi, donc la réponse est oui, bien sûr, il y a eu un impact, notamment un impact de la peinture de Fuseli, Le Cauchemar, où personnellement, moi, je voulais que les scènes de guerre apparaissent comme dans un cauchemar, tandis que les flashbacks, je voulais que la lumière soit plus tamisée. Donc voilà. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for answering our questions. And well, we all appreciated your work and it was outstanding. Thank you for that.
Oh, thank you very much. And the questions have been really lovely in depth, and it's lovely to revisit it all. And thank you so much for translating this whole thing. It's been a pleasure. Pleasure as well. It was a shared pleasure. Bye-bye for now. Thank you. Oh, well, I hope to see you all again soon. Anyway. Yeah, hope to see you. Okay. All right. Take care. Take care. Bye. Bye.